Hello, everyone. Today we'll be going on a little journey of the future that I predict. And that won't just be some crazy conspiracy theories here or just crazy thoughts for what's going to happen, but we're going to look at the history and kind of explain everything from the Enlightenment to Marx to capitalism to what is going on now that's going to change the next, say, 50 years and this almost transitional period for society as a whole, and how we can work to use Marx's thoughts and other processes of transformation to see what is going to happen in the upcoming 50 years in this scary time of transition, because it's always chaotic and it always seems to be so anxiety inducing. But we will look at the history of that and then kind of how we can predict it and what we can look at now to see what could happen in the future through anything from history and through the harbor of this wonderful course of Intro to Sociology. So let's jump into that now, and we'll look at what I'll be covering today. So we'll start with the Enlightenment, Marx and capitalism, social norms, Marx base and superstructure, and then the social structure of the United States, and then the United States future, and then we'll look into my personal future on a micro level, and then we'll look into it if sociologists are activists or scholars. So let's start here with the Enlightenment, and we'll look at when did all of this happen. And the Enlightenment, of course, happened from 1685 to 1815, and with a major peak from 1730 to about 1780. And the major important places for this were across France and Britain, and then the major implementation was within the American colonies, obviously with our American Revolution. And the important philosophers involved in this, we can pinpoint to a simple few, such as John Locke, Montesquieu, Thomas Paine, and all these people that really just attacked all these norms, and they challenged what we thought for so long to be true. And so then these philosophers, they in a way created problems because they challenged this authority, and they delegitimized rulers, they undermined the church monopoly, justified revolution, and they created parallel power structures. So this did create some problems for authority, and it was all through challenging what was thought to be so certain. And this also highlights why the Enlightenment was so dangerous, because it quite literally questioned everything. And it made anything from religion to monarchy to tradition be challenged. And so then moving on into Marx and capitalism, why did Karl Marx have a problem with the capitalist system? And this can be looked into because his general idea was workers produce more value than they're paid. So he was frustrated that owners pocket the difference because they're just sitting there doing nothing. And this is why he had a problem with it, and this is why he looked into it. And diving even deeper, we can look into his concepts of alienation, where workers are alienated on 4 different levels, where they are from the product, from the process, from others, and from themselves. So this is kind of where they're falling into to what is now called the cog in the system, and they're getting a false consciousness. They have to do this. They're falling into this rut that is almost impossible to get out. And these false consciousness was it was just that workers accepted this capitalist ideology as inevitable, and they couldn't get out of it and change that. So moving on, we'll look into the lessons coming from that, and it can really just be seen that in today's economy here in America, that this alienation is getting worse, and more and more people are falling into that rut. And then just greater inequality, let's see here, automation without redistribution, and then just kind of that the the system of capitalism is ongoing and forever growing. Yet we're here on this finite world with a limited amount of resources. So there's going to be more contradictions and more problems there. Moving on now into social norms, we can look at what really happens when we challenge these social norms. What happens when there's an enlightenment period? What happens when we're going through a transitional period in capitalism, in really anything? So we'll first look to the power. So that can be the main factor when you look at a problem and different fights, because everyone wants power, and that's always what humans have been fighting for. So what happens to this power? It's chaotic, I'll tell you that, because the power becomes visible and contested. And this power can either, when we're challenging social norms, this power can either redistribute downward. So these voices that are speaking out can gain the power, or it can be the opposite. It can come straight upwards, and the elites use the chaos and use the confusion to tighten their control and go even further. But what happens most of the time is, in this time of chaos and when social norms are challenged and people are left wondering what the heck's going on, it often is fragmented. And that is that's what happens most of the time, because there's just chaos and collapse all across the society. And the one finite thing is that the people who are left with no power are the laborers and just the identities who keep the old system in check and have zero control. But this then transitions perfectly into how the status quo is challenged, because it all comes from this individual resistance. So these people that are challenging this, they're simply using their voice to change their lifestyle. And that's how the status quo is challenged, because it's flipping that switch and trying to get the ball rolling to change what is happening. And this is where the question of if it's positive or negative comes into play. And that question can't really be answered, because it's so much chaos and it takes so much time for it to work out that it's hard to either succeed or say it's positive or negative. So the people who win are the people who are speaking out, who are trying to fight, but oftentimes it can't be clearly seen because it takes so much time that they often don't get to see that. And then the losses are coming from the people who benefited from the old system and that are wreaking the fight, and they're losing because it's changing. Continuing on, the major theory for creating and maintaining social structure that I found is Marx's base and superstructure. And this theory is kind of just under the core logic of an economic base. And it shows that an economic base fundamentally shapes the superstructure of society. And it explains who creates structure and why, and it predicts when the structure changes, and even connects everything from micro structures to macro. And this theory can teach us so much, because it can be applied to what we're looking at right now with capitalism and this monumental change that we're coming into. And it just can show us now that the gig economy is breaking the American dream ideology, and just that you can even look from the false consciousness on a micro level, but also how systematically we're changing so much. And it can teach us so much into going through a challenging of social norms period and evolving as a society. Now continuing on, we'll look at another theory that I believe represents the social structure in the US today, and that is Froissart's stratified and abundant theory. And this theory is kind of just highlighting, do we have enough resources and technology to meet needs? And is access to these resources distributed equally or hierarchically, or like what is happening? And it kind of just looks at these resources and sees if we can distribute them in a way that it's just and it works out. So looking at this theory, we can see that looking at our current situation, we can see that we have a technological and material abundance. Yet there's extreme cracks in this, with the top 1% of America owning 32% of wealth and the bottom 50% only owning 2%. That's where we start to see these disconnections and these challenges to what we've known for so long. And that's where the ball keeps rolling into creating a societal change. And we're left thinking, what is going on right now? And this theory aligns perfectly with Marx's base and superstructure, because it shows that Marx is right about the underlying dynamics. And it even adds on by explaining the current moment specifically, and it builds on Marx to apply that analysis to contemporary conditions we're facing. And finally, continuing on, we'll look to the future of the United States and if the economy can sustain itself. And I'll answer that right now. I don't think it will. And it's just because of the pressures we are currently facing, and under a climate crisis, automation through AI and all these new technologies, inequalities and worker alienation, all those pressures are building up so much that I personally don't think the US will be able to sustain this for much longer. And this will seriously impact us, because it puts us in a time period of change, and we're either going to have to go through a social democratic system, authoritarian capitalism, or just a full out fragmented collapse. And this will be super impactful, and it will seek some chaos on us while we're going through a changing period. But looking at the micro level and on my personal future, the question, will I be okay? And it shouldn't just be that question. It should be, what's happening? What will I experience? What pressures will I face? What obstacles are there? And looking to this, yes, I will be okay. But there will be so many things I have to experience, so many things that are changing around me. And this can it can be based on the resources I have, the location, and the choices. But no matter what, it's going to be turbulent for everyone. And that's because of the instability politically and socially, and really just the economic vulnerability of everyone. And all of this adds to a psychological toll of just anxiety and not knowing what's going to happen next. And that all comes from the political structures, social structures, and economic structures that going forward into this change, we really don't know what that means. But what we do know is that on a micro scale, I can accept volatility as a new normal, and I'll just find a community and just coming with a positive mindset, looking towards meaning coming from being the transformation and looking to new horizons, not just necessarily achieving success. And looking societally on a macro level, my generation will see a major change. It's inevitable. And I'll be a part of that by being a voice that gets to help shape where we end up in this change. And finally, I'll wrap up here by talking about if I believe sociologists are activists or scholars. And I believe they should be activists. And I really believe this is a no-brainer, because they work to better society and be activist scholars in a way. So yes, they can be both, but in a way, all this knowledge and understanding promotes them to be an activist, because it almost serves a necessary role in society with neutrality being impossible and all this political nonsense. Sociology's purpose is understanding what we can do to enable change and become better, and focusing on who benefits and how looking at all these aspects, looking at people, can be the change and make a safe transition in a period that can be chaotic and turbulent, how it can transition smoothly, and both on the micro and macro level, we can work to transform and become better as a whole. And this is just so important because change requires engaged intellectuals, and that's exactly what sociologists are. They're the educated people on these topics, and they are who can help out with questions and guidance. And overall, I just think that sociologists being activists is a no-brainer, and they are just ethical and understanding injustice, and it really comes down to being practical, and their knowledge disconnected from action is sterile and useless. So they need to take action. They need to get involved to really put their knowledge to the test and put it in the real world. And yes, I would like to conclude on that. And overall, I'm just very interested in this, and I hope you guys are too, to hear me talk and understand what we're going to look into in the future and everything we can look at to base our knowledge and get a general understanding, just like sociologists, to see what we can do moving forward and what we can expect. So thank you guys for joining me on this presentation today, and I really appreciate it if you made it all the way through, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.